So my name is Alexa Canales. I am a composer, a pianist, and an educator, and I currently reside in New Jersey. I just recently completed my doctorate this year, so I'm fresh out of grad school. For my dissertation, it was sort of like two parts. The first part was like writing a paper, and then the other part was like the composition portion. So my paper topic was actually on Sibelius, on his solo songs for voice and piano. I really love chamber music, and my goal, because you can sort of design what you do, if you want to do like a larger scale orchestral work or something, or whatever you're most interested in. For me, I love chamber music, so I was like, I want to do something in that department,
Yeah.
But it has to be like a substantial work and whatnot. So I was like, a multi-movement, piano trio seems like something that'd be really interesting to explore. So that's what I did for it. I wrote it in 2020, so I was sort of going through one of those periods of like, I was writing ideas, but I wasn't like writing a lot of music and a lot of pieces. So for me, this piece was like, I'm going to sit down to write it. I'm going to put all of my time and energy into it. And I just sort of like tried to let go of like everything that was sort of worrying me about it and just like write something that just authentically came to me. So I feel like this piece really ushered me into like the era that I'm at now with my composing, where it sort of like reinvigorated like my creative side. And like I've taken that from this piece and really funneled it into like the stuff that I've written since then. So it's been great for me. I am someone who writes very intuitively and very organically, and very abstractly too. So I don't necessarily write things based on something or like some sort of programmatic source or whatnot. Usually I come up with some sort of idea, and then the inspiration is really like, what can I do to like play around with it? What can I do to explore with it? I generally have like broad ideas of what I want to accomplish, but a lot of times it's like what intuitively feels right. Like, where does this musical material feel like it's leading? And I sort of find inspiration in sort of finding those paths and those detours along the process. I feel like a big thing for when you're composing is just having time. Like the more that you spend doing it, the more things that you try, the more pieces that you write, the more you're able to sort of experiment and then sort of see like what feels like you. And over time, your voice just starts to kind of emerge from that. And so this is a thing where it's like, I feel like this piece, I purposely tried to put everything that felt very me into it. So it's like my relationship with rhythm, my relationship with texture, my relationship with harmony, my relationship with melody. Those are all things that I was like, I'm going to highlight in this piece because I wanted to sort of represent like where I'm at in my compositional journey. That again, sort of reinvigorated something now where I'm like, now that I can identify those things in the pieces that I'm sort of working on now, I'm trying to like lean into that even more. I am working on another chamber piece. It's actually for piano ensemble plus percussion. It was sort of on my list at the beginning of this year that I was like, I want to write something, another chamber piece, but I wanted to be for a different ensemble. And then I was like, I love Puro. And then it sort of worked out, and it's going to be premiered at a festival next month. If at all, if it's ever possible to like show the work to musicians, like I love that and I value that. I feel like this space is so collaborative, or should be so collaborative in that way, where it's like, yes, I'm writing the piece, but like ultimately the piece is going to be brought to life by performers and by musicians that have a hand in like performing it, right? I had the opportunity to sort of show this to some people, and I got their perspective on like things that worked, things that could maybe be tweaked a little bit to work a little bit better. My personal like thing with that is it's like I love performer input and I love performer interpretation. I always like write what my vision is, but I'm like, I want them to bring, their selves to the piece. For me, a piece really starts with consideration for rhythm. Like, what is how is the piece going to move, essentially, right? Movement, how is it going to be pushed forward? And once I get a clear idea of that, it usually like locks into place and opens up the world really to explore like other parameters. I think a lot about texture just in terms of like, how are each of these individual instruments working individually as well as collectively? And so I have this big thing in this piece as well about like independence, right? All of these instruments working independently, and then the interesting things that they sort of create when they align and aren't aligned together, right? So like these sort of like interwoven textures. I love writing for piano. It's my instrument as well. So it's like, I always am super excited when I get the opportunity to write for it, whether in like a solo context or a chamber context. I love writing for strings, you know, that's why this piece was like very special to me. Because I was like, I got to bring those two worlds together with a piano trio. But my whole thing is variety. I like doing different things. So it's like, I wrote this piano trio and then I was like, I want to do something different. So I wrote some solo pieces. And then after that, I was like, well, now I want to do something different. So I'm going to write another chamber piece, but a different one, right? With 6 performers and different instrumentation, different timbres, different colors, stuff like that. I always try to do something a little bit different, you know, and I'm always like, you know, I've explored these particular timbres of these instruments. Like, how can I add to that and explore maybe different things, you know? So it's like, with this Puro ensemble piece, I get to focus on my writing for wind instruments and percussion and adding that into the mix, which has been fun. One of the things I love about Puro too is it's like kind of orchestral in a lot of ways because you have like different families of instruments represented. So it's like you have your winds, you have your strings, you have piano, percussion. So it's like you have such, in a small ensemble setting, like a lot of variety of sound. I always say that it's like a form of self-expression for me, right? Is like being able to express like my voice through my work, but it's also something that I hope like resonates with people. I've been thinking a lot about like, you know, like connection, you know, and it's like stuff that I write, I hope that it connects with other people. I hope that it's an enjoyable experience, but also something that maybe they can, you know, considering it comes from a very personal place of my own, hopefully that it resonates in some sort of personal way with them too. One of the things that I tried to be very specific about with this piece is like treatment of melody. Melody was a really big part of what I used to do when I first started writing. And then over time, I found other avenues that I like to explore as well. And so with this piece, I was like, I really want to like pair my musical voice as it exists now with like this sense of like my melodic voice. And what does that look like now? So from the beginning, it was like, how can I take that idea and really lean into it fully in terms of like the expressive qualities of melody and like lyrical lines and stuff like that. So I feel like I would probably talk about like the progression of that over the course of this piece. So like the beginning of it starts with like a 2-note ascending motive that then essentially gets the opportunity to expand into something longer and more lyrical, like as the piece progresses. And then ultimately the final climax of the piece is like that main melody coming back in its like final sort of form. It's been fun to just explore like different instruments and like the different things that they can do and, you know, the sort of sound qualities of them too. And not just like individual instruments, but also like combinations, right? It's like if you start pairing or grouping together different instruments, even within that Puro ensemble, you can get a variety of like colors and sounds, which is fun. I feel like different parts of the compositional process can present challenges. It's hard to like figure out what the ending of a piece will be, right? Like what is it going to all sort of culminate with at the end? But for me, I think one of the challenges that I face is like beginning a piece. There's always like this moment where things are sort of in flux and I'm like, what direction do I go? And maybe that's too because of the way that I write, sort of intuitively and organically, that like I like to see where it sort of takes me. So there's always a moment when I'm writing something where it like finally clicks into place. And that's the moment where I'm like, okay, now I got it. But it's in the beginning, it's just a challenge of figuring out like, what is the idea? How can I shape this in a way that I can sort of figure out like what I want to do with it? And then once that hopefully clicks into place, it sort of starts to unfold like organically. And yeah, I find that I have an easier time getting into it from there. when I reach some sense of closure. But closure can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be resolution, right? Or like feeling super resolved at the end. But rather like there's a sense of completeness to either the story that's being told or like the journey of like the arc of the piece. When I'm writing a piece, like these ideas exist in this piece, and this is my time to really explore them to like their full capacity. So when I feel like I've been able to play around with them enough, where I've explored their sort of evolution enough, that I feel like that's usually when the natural endpoint comes about. I have a variety of influences. I've always sort of loved the music of like Debussy and Ravel. They've been big influences on my music. I love Sibelius as well, like we were talking about earlier. But also like minimalism has been an influence on me as well. So just like a variety of composers and sort of styles. For a really long time, I think that's why I had trouble like articulating what it is that I do, because, you know, it can lack maybe like concrete or specific like things. But then, like I've had to really think about like how to encapsulate that, how to articulate that. Like, I'm always interested in like, where's the music leading me to, and what kind of interesting things that can, you know, lead to. It's sort of like I try to again, like bring two things together, which is like having a general sense of like, what do I want to accomplish, or what am I interested in exploring? Maybe a general concept of like how long I want the piece to be, right? Or how long I want a particular section to be, but then really like allowing for space to exist within that and allowing for like intuition to essentially like fill in the blanks. I just remember a lot of my childhood with piano because that's my instrument, and that sort of was my like entryway into music. Even before I like started writing music, I didn't start writing until I was in college because I never really knew of that avenue to explore until I was like a music major, and they were like, take a composition course, and I was like, this is great, you know. But before then, like my you know, so much of my musical background was just in playing piano and performing, and I did that in college as well. But I remember as a kid, like I was like 7 or 8, and I was just like my family brought me to somewhere and there was a piano, and I just played by ear, and they're like, maybe we should get her a piano. And then that sort of started my journey. And you know, I took lessons, but I also just like did a lot of like my own arrangements at the piano, and it's still a thing that like I actively like to do, is just sit at my instrument and play. Like I feel very at home when writing for it, because there's that sense of like, you know, your instrument, right? But it like is part of my process and not at different points. I actually don't write at the piano very often when I'm writing for the piano. I like to sort of like have distance away from it, to walk away from it at points, but then return to it at other points to maybe try through things, see what works, see what maybe could be more comfortable. You know, it's always part of the process in some way, where it's like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play through this, or I'm going to maybe generate ideas at the instrument and then sort of take them away from the piano, put them into like notation software and start playing around with them, you know? I wrote a piece at the end of last year, and it was the first piece that I most like 90+% wrote at the piano, but mostly it's away from it. And it's just like, you just sort of challenge yourself, I guess, in a way, right? You're like, I'm just going to write something and then see what sort of comes of it. And then you can still revisit the instrument and play through it. But I find that it like frees up sort of how I write for it sometimes. I'm just really excited to be part of this project. I was fortunate enough to be on the like kickoff concert last month in San Antonio, and I was there, and it was just like a really wonderful experience. Everyone is so lovely, and like I'm just very excited for like the future of this project. All of the performances that are coming this year, I'm like super excited to follow. Thank you. All right, I'll see ya.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this interview and want to see more like it, check out the 30x30x30 playlist on our channel. For more information about the 30x30x30 project, check out the website linked to the right.